My lesson is not as positive as the Braves podcast. Fruit and fun and fellowship. And I promise we're going to end in a good place. Do I need the mic? Do they need the mic is a more important question. Hey, if you're watching from home, if you need me to use the mic, let Wyatt know right now. Or post it in the comments or whatever. Yes, we need the mic. Cool. We're going to end in a good place. It's going to get messy on the way down.
All right, let's do it.
Sometimes life is like that. If that's the first you're hearing about life getting messy, I apologize in advance. Title of the lesson today is The Long Way Down. And this is the end of our mountain series. We've done 3 months going up the mountain, staying on the mountain, going down the mountain. And this is it. But before that, I want to say, before we get into the lesson, I want to preview what we're talking about the next 3 months here, which is the land. You're appropriately excited about, the land. It's like the least exciting of the things we can talk about, right? There's a desert, that's mysterious and cool. And then there's a river, that sounds refreshing. And a mountain, how strong. And then the land. Oh, meet the land. We live in, Jesus lived in an agricultural society. And we live in an agricultural society here in the Tri-Cities.
There you go.
And there's a lot of things we can learn from and about the land. And even today, the teaching committee got together, we were talking about, okay, what are we going to do the next 3 months? And there's some land topics and some land ideas that I think are perfect for our church right now. You know, when we started this year, we needed to be in the desert. We needed some time to listen to God's voice. It was perfect, right? And then the river, we talked about transitions and crossing over and new steps, and that was perfect for that time. And I think being on the mountain and spending time in God's presence, that's perfect. And right now, we need a harvest. We need to stay close to the vine. We need to grow and harvest together. We need to see some fruit too, don't we? Do we need some wins as a church?
Yes.
No, someone's like, no! Get out of here! I need some wins, honestly. I want to see the land produce fruit. I want to eat of that fruit like Ed's watermelon shirt. And most importantly, I want us to do it together as a team. And so I'm excited about what the teaching committee is starting to put together. I think we're going to have some really important conversations for the next few months. And then we'll have another year, and we'll see what happens. I'm excited. Okay, Genesis 22. Why don't you turn over there with me? Talking about the long way down. And we spent all this time talking about these amazing things that happen on the mountaintop, and how incredible God is, and how we get to see God's hind parts. That was a whole other thing. If you missed it, I'm sorry. Let's do a not-so-fun one, shall we? Let's talk about what happens when the mountaintop experience goes wrong. Big question we're going to ask today is, what do I do when I get hurt on the mountain? What if somebody in the church hurts me? That would never happen here, though, right? We would never hurt each other. What happens when you get hurt at the mountaintop? Genesis 22, I didn't put the whole thing up there. Hope you brought your Bible. Or your phone, probably. Genesis 22, verse 1. Sometime later, after some other thing, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, not rubbing it in, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac, and when he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up, probably very confused, and said to his father Abraham, Father. Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told them about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, shut up, dude. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. Amen. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. Man, there's a lot there. Can't even get into all. There's so much. Oh, there's like 10 other sermons here. Let's keep going. Verse 15, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this, because you have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of your enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. And Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba. And Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Long story. Thanks for sticking with me. What a great story, right? About Abraham doing something scary, and God blesses him and rewards it. And I've heard that lesson a million times, right? About how faithful Abraham is, and how incredible he is, and how he trusts the promises of God. And every time I'd hear that lesson, I'd be like, what about Isaac? What was going through his head that whole time? And there's a characterization we do of Isaac of, wow, Isaac was faithful too. Look, he just laid down a little wood. What a good boy. I'd like to think that because these are human stories, there are probably some human fears and some human concerns at work here. The question we're going to ask today, what do I do when I go to the mountaintop and I end up the sacrifice? I'm going to share personally. I'm going to share some things that happened around me as a kid, some things that were done not to me, but near me. I was never put on a sacrifice and no knives were ever held over my head. But maybe you've had experiences like that, right? You've been sacrificed before for somebody else's glorious God moment, haven't you? You've been knocked down. You've been hurt. You've been dismissed. You've been betrayed, potentially. You got bruised, didn't you? A couple times even. There's some scrapes. There's a scar you could show if you really wanted to. Of that one time, that one brother. Or that thing that sister said that you never really got over. That broken relationship. This happens a lot. I've been hurt too. My parents are elders in the church. Right? They're elders. They weren't always elders. They weren't born elders. We're not Mormons. But they were always, as long as I could remember, in a position of leadership within our church in Montgomery County, Maryland. Hold your applause. And I remember, and I tell this story a lot, I remember in our Honda Odyssey, sitting in the back, coming home from midweek, basically every week, hearing every single thing that was wrong with our church. And hearing about how stressed out my parents were, how much they loved the church and they kind of hated it. None of us have ever been there, right? Man, we've committed so much to this thing. And if everyone would just listen, if everyone could just stop being such sinners all the time, if everyone could just be Christians, gosh, dang it, then we'd be a church. And I couldn't have known at the time how much that would affect my own attitudes towards the church. I tell people sometimes, I think of the church sometimes like a math problem that can be solved. Man, is that jacked up on so many levels. But what they were doing unknowingly is they're trying to do this great thing for God. They were trying to be leaders and servants in the church. And who got sacrificed? In a lot of ways, it was me. And this is not my sob story. This, woe is me, everybody pat me on the back. But I got victimized a little bit by the pursuits of other people. And this has happened over and over in my life and in my walk with God. I've had leaders and disciplers who wanted to do a great thing, and I was expendable. I got told in campus one time, a new campus leader came into our campus ministry and basically told me point blank, I've got all these young guys I could train, and they're going to be around for a while, so I'm going to focus on them instead of you because you're out of here. You're a senior, so you're not really worth training. To me, I've had disciples tell me that it was not their job to be honest with me. I have to be honest with them, but they don't have to tell me everything. But let's go on. It happens. It happens to me. It happens to you. Allie and I were in Boise with the Lamonts. We did a Northwest Leaders Retreat. Speaking of great leadership, come on, our Northwest leaders are awesome. They would never do this. And we were sharing about, from Philemon, there's kind of two methods that you can use with people, right? You can love them and appeal to them on the basis of love. Wow. Or you can do the force and coerce method. And I had a thought as we were discussing this force and coerce method. I said, that would never work on me. And then I thought, yeah, it would. Actually, it has worked on me. I've actually been forced and coerced, even in the church. And what I'm trying to say here is that these mountaintop experiences can be incredible. They can sting. They can change your whole life. And sometimes you go up the mountain with this expectation that things are going to change and everything's going to be perfect now and it's going to be incredible. And then you end up on the wood and there's a knife above your head. And you go, wait. Yeah, that wasn't supposed to happen. Where's the ram? Why am I the victim here? How long is that road down the mountain once you've been the sacrifice? How long can the road be? Because it creates these questions. Why? Why did this happen to me? What now? What do I do about this? What does this mean about God? What does this experience say about my value in God's eyes? How do I move forward? How do I get out of here? How do I move on? How do I fix? There's so many questions that come with this experience, and so I can relate to Isaac in so many ways, and I hope you can. Well, I kind of hope you can't relate to Isaac, but I know you can, because you've experienced it. You've been disappointed. You've been let down. Expectations got missed. You got stabbed in the back. You got hurt. You got bruised. You got knocked down. Me too. There's a midrash, because of course there is. You guys know what midrashes are? I say it every time. Midrashes are how you dance with the text. It's how you boogie with it. The midrashes are what the rabbis would say about the text. It's the story about the story. Now, it's a very simplistic idea, but these rabbis, these Jewish rabbis, told a story about this story, and it takes place in verse 19. I'm going to read it again. Verse 19 says, "Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba. And Abraham stayed in Beersheba." Fascinating, right? Oh my gosh, Beersheba, no way. They ask a really good question, these rabbis. They say, hey, what happened to Isaac? Did Isaac come down the mountain with them? Did he go to Beersheba as well? Actually, we don't get to see Isaac again for a couple chapters. And in the span of the story, it's a couple of years before we see Isaac again. And this midrash, this story about the story, is that Isaac didn't go down the mountain with Abraham. Isaac went somewhere else. Isaac was so traumatized, so blown away by this experience, so hurt that he couldn't even go home with Dad. Turn over to chapter 24, verse 62 really quick. I might have it up here. Yeah. Now Isaac, this is the next time we see Isaac after years. Years after this Mount Moriah experience. Now, Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. Where was Isaac this whole time? He wasn't in Beersheba with his dad. He was in Beer Lahai Roi. Why does that matter at all? Do you guys know who founded Beer Lahai Roi? Oh, if you know the story, you're about to jump for joy. Hagar, Abraham's mistress, who got cast out of the family. So who lives at Beer Lahai Roi? People who got hurt by Abraham. Have a great Sunday, everybody. Isaac gets the knife. He gets spared. He comes down the mountain. He goes, I don't know where to go. I'm going to go with my, not stepmom, my half-brother. Do you feel it? Do you feel this broken thing? Broken trust, broken relationships, broken family. It's all messed up. It's not how it's supposed to be, right? There was this promise about a family of God that does things the right way. And this God who's merciful and loving, and things are going to go right finally through this Abraham family. And Isaac lives in Beer Lahai Roi. It's all broken. we read these stories. We read about Isaac. We read these tragedies at times. Trust me, it ends in a good place, I swear. We read these stories because it happened and it happens. I'm going to say that again. We read them because it happened and it happens. Now, I know that you guys never do this, but for me, sometimes I get hurt in the church and I act so shocked. I go, what? This conglomeration of sinful people, redeemed people, but we're still sinners, they hurt me? A brother in Christ said something that I didn't like? Someone skipped an appointment with me? I can't fathom it. How did this happen? We act so shocked. So when this stuff happens to you, we're going to talk a lot about perspective today. I urge you to not get shocked when you get burnt. Because you already have a burn. You don't want to have a shock as well. That's too much. We're going to talk about perspective and how to reframe these hurtful experiences with joy. Come on. Isaac's experience ends with joy. I promise you that. If you don't believe me, the Bible's right there. This does end with joy, but there's some things we got to talk about on the way there. We got to talk about the broken relationship between Isaac and Abraham, from Abraham's perspective. And we're going to talk about the broken relationship between Isaac and God and how the whole thing came back together. So chapter 22, back to verse 9. I don't think I have a slide for it. Oh, I do. Man, I'm good. Come on, babe. Josh, make slides. If I could do that for $300,000 a year, I think I would. Back to the story. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. I want to defend Abraham for a second. He's doing exactly what God told him to do. And some of us, to turn the knife a little bit, some of us have been Abraham in these situations, right? I'm just doing what God told me to do. I'm holding my brother accountable. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm telling the truth. I'm trying to speak it in love, but I'm speaking the truth. Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? And Abraham ends up in the situation where he's done the right thing. The right promises have been made. He even gets the ram, but he loses his son in the process. And you got to be thinking, if you're Abraham, what just happened? How did I lose everything? I barely got this son to begin with. I wasn't supposed to have kids, and now I've lost this thing that I've been waiting for decades. This isn't how it's supposed to be. Can you imagine the emotions he's feeling as his son walks off towards who knows where? Can you imagine the loss? How is he doing? How do you deal with hurt? You end up sustained by the promise. Check out verse 17. I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth can be blessed because you have obeyed me. What sustains us when we're hurt on the mountain? We're sustained by the promise. We're sustained by this joy, this promise, this good thing that has been set before us because we know we're headed in the right direction. This is not easy stuff. This is like discipleship 501. This is master's level stuff. To process hurt and to understand, okay, I'm hurt right now. This feels terrible. I'm confused, but I know that there's a good thing at the end. I'm not saying these things to dismiss our hurts, because a lot of us have been burned up, This is a hospital in a lot of ways for trauma we've had outside and inside the church. I'm not dismissing any of it. But this whole story changes if you have a promise that's sustaining you. If there's been something set before you and you know that these hurts are not the end of the story. Abraham watches Isaac leave and he goes, you know what? I know that my descendants will be as numerous as the stars. God is honest, he is truthful, he's a promise keeper. And so I can keep going. So what does Abraham do in the meantime? We said there's years in between this sacrifice or near sacrifice and then when we see Isaac again. Just flip over to chapter 24 really quick. We're not going to read it because we just don't have time. But in chapter 24, this amazing thing happens. Especially once you kind of realize where Isaac's at, where he's not. The story of Genesis 24, the story of Genesis 24 is about how Abraham sends his servants to get a wife for his son. Why does Abraham do this? He hasn't seen his son in years. Well, he does it because that's what a father does. He just does what he's supposed to do. And he goes, I haven't seen my son in years, but I'm going to try to fix this relationship by honoring it and honoring my role within it. That is so powerful. To go, man, my son hates me. He doesn't trust me. He doesn't want to see me. His mom died. He didn't even come home to bury his mom. I'm still going to get him a wife because that's what a father does. Right? Question for you. Do you continue to honor your broken, strained, or faded relationships? In and out of church. I'll tell you what, guys, I've been at this for a little bit. I'm getting old spiritually, and I've had a lot of friends, young people, leave the church.
Yeah.
Some of them have left the church in part because of things that I have said and done to them. I'm Abraham in this situation. I've been hurtful. I've been negligent. I've been a bad friend and a bad brother to people. And not to say, wow, I drove this person out of the church, but I know that I didn't help. What can I do? I can continue to honor my broken and faded and strained relationships. Maybe you have parents or kids who just don't really want to talk to you anymore. A brother or a sister. Maybe it's just a person you were really close to within the church who you just don't talk anymore after that conversation, or that hurt, or that line got crossed. What are you doing about it? Do you continue to honor your broken relationships? A rhetorical question for you. Do you have any irreparable relationships? The scriptures would say no, you don't. That's why it's rhetorical. You go, yeah, this person that I can't talk to anymore. No, you don't. Have you tried to murder them? No? You don't have any irreparable relationships. And I know that can be hard to believe because, no, Josh, you don't get it. This conversation was so awful and I cried so much. I haven't spoken to that person in a decade, so you don't get it, Josh. You're right. You're right, I don't. I wasn't there. I don't know. I assert to you, it's irreparable. If you continue to honor the relationships that God has put in your life, they are irreparable. It's still a long way down. It's still a hard road. But these hurts can be healed. What does Abraham do for his son? He gets him a wife, because that's what a dad does. Let's rewind to Isaac really quick. Chapter 24, verse 61. Oh, I love this image. Chapter 24, verse 61. It works, by the way. Abraham does get the wife. It says, then Rebekah, that's the wife, and her maids got ready and mounted their camels and went back with the man. So the servant took Rebekah and left. Now Isaac, there he is, had come from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. He went out to the field one evening to meditate. And as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, who is that man in the field coming to meet us? He is my master, the servant answered. So she took her veil and she covered herself. And this is my favorite part. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Put yourself in Isaac's shoes for just a quick second here. What are you doing after all this hurt? You're sitting in a field. I love it. I love that he's just sitting in a field. And he's just doing a think. He's Kermit on a log with a banjo, just like, what is going on? Who is this God? Why has all this stuff happened to me?
Right.
And then he looks up and he sees her. And then he sees his servant. He's like, I know that guy. And as Isaac's putting the pieces together and the servant's explaining it, this thought starts coming to Isaac's mind. He goes, my dad doesn't hate me. And choked up just thinking about it. My dad still sees value in me. My dad has continued to honor the relationship and he wants me back. I am not a sheep or a goat or something expendable to my dad. He has continued to love me. will ask you, what have your actions said to those you have hurt or been hurt by? I have more too, but honestly, do I need to? There's this thing about the apologetic action. There's this thing that God does when we're sincere, when we just apologize, when we continue to honor the relationships in our lives. I think about my first discipler in campus. I won't say his name. Maybe he'll see this someday and he'll be like, hey, really? He's the one who told me that he didn't have to be honest with me all the time. And granted, I was 18 and he was 19, so we had a real Bill and Ted situation going on. I don't even I've had enough removal now that I've forgiven him, but at the time it freaking hurt, man.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I trusted this guy. I've known this guy since I was like 11. And he's discipling me. He says, Josh, you're going to be a Bible talk leader. And you're going to do great things for God. And then some stuff went down. A girl, obviously. Neither of us married her, by the way. And we didn't talk. It worked out great for everybody. We didn't talk a whole lot after that. And he graduated. He's got a great ministry job now. And I moved on and moved to the hinterlands of Spokane. And when I was in Spokane, I went to this campus ministry conference, and who was speaking to all the men? Yeah, you know it was this guy. Because he's doing great. And I was like, I gotta listen to 20 minutes of this guy? Are you kidding me? And I was so bitter, guys. So bitter. And he gets up and he's sharing about all the places he's been in ministry and all the experiences he's had. And I'm like, whatever. People really knew the real you. He goes, and I've realized that I've hurt a lot of people in ministry. And I've misused my authority at times. And I perked up. And I'm not kidding. He looked right at me. I'm in this crowd of like 400 dudes. He looked right at me and he went, if I could just tell each of them how sorry I am for hurting them. I don't think it would fix anything, but I feel so good about the ability to apologize to them. That did it for me. He was like that. We're in the same fantasy football league now. He won't make trades with me still. Until we still have some things to resolve. But the apologetic action heals. When we continue to, if you're Abraham, if you've hurt somebody in your family or in the church, when you continue to honor your relationships, God fixes them.
Yeah.
Let's talk about God, shall we? Chapter 21, verse 6. Because Isaac's got some stuff with God. But it's important before we get into all that, it's important to remember how God sees Isaac. Who does God think Isaac is? And in verse 6, Sarah said, God has brought me laughter. The name Jacob means he laughs. God has brought me, he laughs. And everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. How does God view Isaac? Well, Isaac is joy. Isaac is laughter. Isaac is a kept promise. Isaac is the next step on this long story about healing and redemption and forgiveness. Isaac is valuable to God. And Isaac's got this godly character. We won't read it, but in verse 7, what does Isaac do? He goes, hey, Dad, where's the ram? He's a curious kid. He wants to honor God. He's obedient to his dad. He's got this great godly character. God's doing so much for him. And that curiosity and that obedience that Isaac has backfires. So of course it hurt. And it wasn't just dad holding the knife. It was God holding the knife. And being like, you're not valuable. You're just a sheep raised for the slaughter. How bad would that hurt if you're Isaac and you're like 13?
Right.
And you're like, are you kidding me? I'm a good kid. I carried the wood all the way up here. Now you're going to sacrifice it.
Yeah.
We have a choice when we're Isaac, when we're sitting on the altar and the knife's above us. We have a choice to fixate on that hurt or to remain curious. Remember, God put that curiosity in Isaac. God put that obedience on Isaac's heart. And Isaac has a choice. I can get out of town, and I can be bitter, and I can live in Beerle for the rest of my life with Ishmael. Or I can remain curious. How long does it take for Isaac? I don't know. Years. Years. But the next time we see him, he's sitting in a field. And he's just thinking. And I love the idea that Isaac's sitting in this field, it's the middle of the night, and he's just looking up at the stars, and he's like, man, remember that time at Mount Moriah? God, what were you doing? I love the idea that Isaac was still curious, and he was still reaching out for the answer. It takes years. Maybe he couldn't talk to God for years. Clearly he couldn't talk to his dad for years. But he was still curious. That curious heart didn't go away. This can be the encounter. We talked about this before, right? There's two mountains. And even the bad stuff can be the encounter with God. And Isaac finds a way for this to be the encounter with God. Even though it's terrible, he's still reaching out. And in verse 62 of chapter 24, I know we've read it before, I'll keep reading it. Now Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roy, for he was living in the Negev. He went out to the field one evening to meditate. He's just thinking. He's reaching out for answers. He's dying to know what's going to happen with this God. And what does God do? He shows up. God goes, maybe this was, I love the idea. Marty Solomon talks about this on the Bama podcast. This might have been the first time that Isaac has spoken to God since the dead. Can you just think about that for a second? The next time we see Isaac, he's meditating, he's thinking about this stuff, and God shows up immediately. God goes, thanks for calling. Here's a wife. You never texted me back. Wow, right? Look at what God does when we stay curious, when we don't fixate on the hurt. Because what happens is there's this resentment starts. You guys know that word, resentment? It's based on a French word, recenter. We have a bruise or a cut or whatever, and we just keep coming back to it. We just keep picking at that scab, and it gets worse, and it scars over. That's what resentment is. And Isaac had the opportunity to resent and to fear and to quit, and he doesn't quit. He just doesn't quit. Neither does God. God doesn't quit on him either. And how does God reward him? Verse 67, Isaac brought her, Rebekah, into the tent of his mother Sarah. He came home, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. God shows up in a huge way for Isaac. He gets comfort, he gets a wife, and he gets to go home after all this time. There's this rapper that I love. His name's Nipsey Hussle. One knows what I'm talking about.
Loved.
Barely anybody else does. This guy Nipsey Hussle, he had this. He's an entrepreneur. He's a philanthropist. He was all about making money and then pouring it back into the community. And he was murdered a couple years ago, actually. Cut down way too early in his life. He was like 30 something. And he would do these interviews before he died, and he'd talk about this brand, this clothing brand he had. It's called the Marathon clothing, Marathon record label, Marathon everything. And the reason he called it the Marathon is he said, I'm not special. I'm not some great talent. My one defining quality, he said this, my one defining quality is I just didn't quit. I love that. Maybe that tattooed on my leg or something. My one defining quality is I just didn't quit. What if we had that attitude towards our hurt? I got knocked down, I got bruised, I got betrayed, I got stabbed in the back, I got disappointed, I got to be the sacrifice for somebody else's God moment, and I just didn't quit. I just kept going, I just kept believing, and I knew that there was something set before me, a promise, a joy that could keep me moving forward. What happens to Isaac after all this? Well, he buries his dad, which is a huge deal. Dad has honored the relationship, so now he's going to honor his commitment to his dad by burying him. Wow, right? He talks to God, and God talks back. Chapter 26. My question for us, this is the question, man. This is it, right here. Is life hurtful with moments of joy, or is it joyful with moments of hurt? Man, you better have an answer for that question. Is it hurtful with moments of joy, or is it joyful with moments of hurt? Because if your life is just pain, and there's every once in a while you get to go on vacation to Hawaii, man, is that life? Is that actually life? If it's like, yeah, I hate my job, and my family, and ups and downs, I go to this church, and it's okay, and Everything just hurts all the time. It's just bad all the time. But every once in a while, well, Christmas is coming around. I like that. Oh, I got a raise. That's kind of like, if it's just hurt with moments of joy, you're living this escapist vacation lifestyle that is not sustainable.
Wow. Yeah.
If it's joyful, if life is joy, if the ending place is joy, but there's these moments of hurt, then the moments get reframed by the joy.
Right.
These moments of hurt are speed bumps. They're detours. As my favorite author, Kurt Vonnegut, says, they're dancing lessons from God. How do you approach your hurt? Because you've been hurt. So have I, and you're going to keep getting hurt, so don't be shocked. How do you approach it? Is it a shocker? Does it shut you down? Or do you go, oh, right, I'm on the way to something. God is leading me someplace important, someplace joyful. God is keeping a promise to me, but there's bumps along the way. Joy is the landing place. And so I wonder, how long is the road? You can pop it up. How long is that road? The road from hurt. Maybe you've experienced spiritual abuse, which is somebody in a position of spiritual authority taking advantage of you. Bruises, disappointment, trauma, if you like the T word, trauma. Do you believe that it lands here? I have friends who are like skiers and snowboarders. They're much cooler than I am. I can't do it because I'm afraid of falling on my butt. And sometimes, when I was a kid especially, when I was a high schooler, my friends would go on like ski trips, and they'd show off their bruises. Like, yeah, I hit this tree, it was gnarly. I went off this jump, and I landed square on my back, and I hit a rock, and I'm like, thank God you're 15, because if you were 45, we wouldn't be talking. And you'd see like the scars and the bruises, and they're like, best trip ever! Because they landed at the bottom. They knew that the bottom reframed the entire mountain. The joy reframes the experiences. These bruises, these scars, these cuts, there's something completely different now. At the top of the mountain, they're the worst thing that ever happened to you. At the bottom of the mountain, they're a great story. They're a lesson. They're the thing that changed my mind so that I could experience joy fully. Hurt is out there, it's real. Spiritual abuse, bruises, all these things are real. They happen, but joy is the landing zone. Isaac gets to move back in. He gets to continue the story. And I gotta ask you, did this experience on Mount Moriah help him get there, or did it hurt? Ultimately, that sacrifice, didn't it help him get to this moment? Would he have appreciated Rebecca the same way? Would he have been as close to his dad as he ended up being? There's probably a lot of other stuff going on that needed to get healed by a hurt. Wow. Let's talk about joy. Let's end this thing out. Hurt does not end the story. We have to believe this. We have to believe that hurt takes us where we need to get to. I'm not dismissing hurt, but I urge us to make the choice to stay curious. A couple thoughts, questions to ask, ideas here. First challenge for us is, if you are Abraham, if you've been the hurter, continue to love the disillusioned. Continue to honor your relationships, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Continue to honor the relationships that God has put in your life. One of my best friends, this guy Brent, we text every single day. He's been out of the church for a couple of years now. And Allie's like, we should stop texting about the stupid Chargers. Okay, they won. She loves Brent. Brent loves us. Brent is he's one of the best friends I ever had. He hasn't been a Christian in years. I continue to honor the relationship. Why? Because I love Brent. Not because some pastor told me to do it in a sermon. It's because Brent's worth it to me. God put that relationship in my life. I want to keep honoring it. Maybe you've been Isaac. I urge you to keep seeking answers. Stay curious. This is a long road. There's a lot of twists and turns, but I urge you to keep seeking answers. My last question for you, as we begin to turn our eyes towards the cross and communion, I want you to just ask yourself, what has been set before me? What's the bottom of the mountain? Is it joy? Is it family? Is it true, meaningful friendship? Is it freedom from sin? Is it a promise? What has been set before me? Let's close out in Hebrews 12. What? The scripture points back to Jesus? No way. Curveball. I don't know who wrote this, but whoever she was awesome. Whoa! No, it's Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him, who endured such opposition from sinners like me, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Oh, man, right? Ah, chills, goosebumps. Perspective transforms hurt and suffering into joy. You give it a long enough walk, if you're willing to make that hike down the mountain, I promise you, God shows up. He rewards our perseverance with joy. That is what he has set before us. Just before this, there's this chapter they call it the Hall of Faith. It's about how incredibly faithful all these Old Testament folks were. And at the end of that, the writer, they say, yeah, and none of those people with all that faith ever got what was promised to them. That doesn't seem right. Abraham gets this promise. Isaac, you're the family of God, descendants as numerous as the stars. They never got it in their lifetime. But they kept going because there was this joy set before them. Jesus, why could he endure the cross? Because there was a joy set before him. The joy of seeing us enter kingdom relationships. The joy of seeing us freed from the bondage of sin. And what's set before us? It's Jesus.
Yeah.
The thing set before us, the thing we're meant to fix our eyes on is the pioneer, the author, and the perfecter of our faith.
Yeah.
If Jesus is what is set before you, you can endure anything.
Yeah.
You can be the sacrifice for somebody else. It might take time. You might have to go to a field and meditate, but I promise you, there is joy at the finish line. Let us be a church that just didn't quit. Let us be disciples who just never quit. Let us fix our eyes. May we please fix our eyes on the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith, the one who teaches us what true joy is. Love you guys. Grace and peace to you. Let's bow our heads. Father, sheesh. Father, you know what's up, God. You know how long the journey is. You know how long the road down the mountain is. And God, we put it all before you as we come to your Son, to his sacrifice on the cross, God. Thank you for the life that he lived. Thank you for his body that was broken, for his blood that was spilled, so that we could experience true kingdom joy. God, bless us. Bless our hurts and bless our healing. Show up for us the same way you showed up for Isaac and Abraham and every other person. God, show up for us so that we can understand true joy at the finish line, God. Thank you for your Son, Jesus. Be with our worship and our fellowship. I love you. I pray all these things in your Son's name. Amen.